We're starting off with breaking news. You guys know there were multiple charges against Donald Trump, but one of them that has kind of flown under the radar for a while is the hush money lawsuit, right? So that lawsuit where Stormy Daniels claimed that Donald Trump allegedly paid her off like hush money to keep her quiet. Well, that case is back in the news today because Donald Trump has been sentenced. We're going to get into this. Breaking news, ladies and gentlemen, the Trump sentencing. Check this out.
Breaking news out of a New York City courtroom right now. President-elect Donald Trump is being sentenced in his hush money conviction just 10 days before he is set to return to the White House. The unprecedented ruling follows a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court to deny Trump's last-minute appeal last night. CNN's Laura Coates is outside the New York court. Laura, walk us through where things stand right now. A lot of things happening at this very moment.
Well, we may not have been here, but for the Supreme Court last night deciding in a 5-4 decision, a very tight ruling where Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined with the so-called liberal justices to say that this could go forward. We knew from the judge it was unlikely that this is going to be a jail imposition or a probation period or a fine. The judge has now had an opportunity to review a probation report written in connection with interviews from the president-elect and the probation officer, who said during the report that it seemed that Trump believed he was, quote, above the law. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, the president-elect, soon to be president in just 10 days, is arguing that the indictment...
Oh, I don't know what happened there.
Following his inauguration, has believed that the American people did not want a case like this to be brought under a category of lawfare. The judge, Judge Merchan, has said, which is the understatement of a lifetime, this has been a truly extraordinary case. Indeed, it has been. We have never seen a time when an American president, former, of course, or president-elect, has been convicted of felony counts, this to the tune of 34. Now, it is a Class E felony in the state of New York, which normally does not necessarily bring a jail time. It's not universally accepted as that, but it doesn't always have jail time. But the idea of no probation, no fine is directly connected from the decision of the judge, it seemed, and we're waiting to hear that final point. This is a president-elect who has argued that he would be unable to fully govern if he were to have certain contingencies or conditions above him. He does note, the judge said, it is the office of the presidency that is extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. But again, he is a president-elect. Trump wanted this to be delayed until after he became the president again. The judge thought it was incumbent on the decision to honor the jury's verdict and, of course, the rule of law to allow this particular defendant and all defendants to have the finality of a sentence. Jim, although we are using the phrase convicted felon, there is a slight nuance to this. It is not a done deal until after the sentence. And then that's the catalyst to be able to have your full appellate rights and go after all the different legal issues here. Merchan says that once the courtroom doors closed, the trial was no different from any other in the courthouse. I was in that courthouse. I got to tell you, what was so extraordinary, aside from the fact that it was the former president of the United States there, is that he was being treated, and in a courtroom, unlike any other, not like any other defendant, when the rule of law and the criminal prosecution and the weight of your name after a jurisdiction versus is in front of you.
So again, if you're just joining us, we are starting with breaking news here. This is Donald Trump has been sentenced. And I do want to say something about this really quickly before we continue. Basically, what the judge has said is that he is not going to treat Donald Trump differently because he's going to be president again of the United States, because he's a billionaire. He's like, I'm not going to treat you any differently. And the moment that I heard that, I was like, uh-oh, right? Now, if you didn't hear the outcome yet, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but the judge was like, I am not going to treat you differently.
Yeah, and Laura, I guess when this is all said and done, and you were just saying, and we've all been saying, we expect there not to be a sentence of jail time or anything like that for the president-elect. But take us through the next steps. He'll be able to appeal the conviction. That process continues on even while he's president?
Oh, yes, he wants it to continue on. He does not want this title of convicted felon. He does not believe that this case should have been resurrected according to the laws and on the books. But remember, ever since this case even started, he was convicted and a verdict entered back in May of last year. The Supreme Court has issued this interim opinion about immunity, that not only can you not prosecute a sitting president for official acts, but you can't use official acts to then form the basis of evidence in criminal matters. Trump believes that his statements and statements that were made to people who were a part of the administration and beyond, whether it be Hope Hicks or others, should not have been allowed to be entered into the evidence and therefore could have unduly tainted the jury's view of the case. Merchan is saying, however, the considerable, indeed extraordinary legal protections afforded the office of the chief executive is a factor that overrides all else in his sentencing. But remember, he's a president-elect, so a lot of that is not applied to him yet, and the judge wanted this done beforehand. This will be quite a slap on the wrist. I'm curious if the judge will in fact address the contempt or even the statements Trump has made about the judge and his family as well.
Let's pause here for a second. So let me explain a couple of things. First of all, there was that ruling from the Supreme Court that a sitting president obviously cannot be prosecuted. Here's the catch. He is not yet a sitting president. The presidential inauguration is January 20th, I believe. It's on MLK Day. So this is why the judge wanted to make sure that he hit him with this ruling before the presidential inauguration. So everybody needs to remember that. I see a lot of people that I guess maybe they just tune in during election time and maybe don't follow politics along the way. But I've noticed a number of people are like, well, Trump's in there. He needs to do this, Donald Trump is not a sitting president yet. So that means the judge can do this, and there's nothing the Supreme Court can really do about that. Let's go on a little bit more.
All right, Laura Coates, thank you very much. With me now, CNN anchor and chief White House correspondent Caitlin Collins and CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig. Ellie, let me go to you first. What's your reaction to what we've been hearing so far?
Well, it's pretty orderly, all things said. Donald Trump seems to have gone on a little bit of a tirade, but nothing unpredictable, nothing different from what he said before. One thing that I think is interesting is there's been no talk whatsoever, except from Donald Trump, about the actual conduct that Donald Trump was tried and found guilty for. For a while, the DA was trying to say this conduct of hiding the hush money payments. There we go. So that's the official moment of the sentence. Donald Trump has now been sentenced to an unconditional discharge.
What does that mean?
That means that it is now official that Donald Trump has been convicted of a felony. There's two parts of that equation, the conviction, and now we have part two, the sentence. So that is a moment. We now have Donald Trump. I guess you can technically, if you would like to call him a convicted felon, that is a label that now technically applies. But of course, he does have his appeal rights. But again, the focus has been, okay, lawyers are packing up. So
Judge.
Pause here for a second. So here's the thing, folks. The judge did sentence him. So he has been convicted. That means he will be a felon. Now, it's unconditional. So let me explain what this unconditional thing means. It means that there isn't going to be a penalty, but he still will have the conviction and he still will be a felon. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, if I was Donald Trump, just take that and move on. But Donald Trump did not want that label. He did not want to be convicted at all. It wasn't just for him. It wasn't just about the penalty. He also didn't want to be labeled as a felon. So now he officially is a convicted felon here. That does not stop him from going into the White House. I know some people don't understand this. Some people on social media, they were saying, well, he's sentenced now, so he can't be president. No, that's actually not true. So people have to understand, remember what we told you before, that he can even run for office from prison, which has been done before. Remember Eugene Debs. So we have to go back and look at history a little bit, but he has been sentenced. He does have that charge right now, but there isn't going to be a penalty. Now, I know a number of you are thinking some things. A number of you are like, what about everybody else? If it were anyone else who wasn't a billionaire, if it was anyone else who wasn't a former president-elect, they probably would have had a penalty, and you would be correct. So even with this particular story, I want you to open your eyes. And I want you to see it for what it really is. Put the partisan politics aside for just a second and just look at what people are able to get away with in the criminal justice system when they have the money, the resources, and the name recognition. So keep that in mind. What did I tell you? Money runs everything. So the people who have the money, who have the resources, who have the networks, they're able to get the best lawyers. They're able to get out of these jams. It would have been no different if it was anyone. If it was Joe Biden, we would be in the same situation. If it was Joe Biden, he also would not have a penalty. If it was Elon Musk, he wouldn't have a penalty. These people are not going to be held accountable by the criminal justice system for the most part. We have even seen this with people like Epstein, and, it took them forever to really go after him after knowing everything they knew when he was back in Palm Beach. They knew about Epstein. It took them forever to go after him. And even when they went after him, they didn't go after the head of the snake. He was just a part of the snake, right? So they'll go after like the little men or whatever. But when they go after someone like Donald Trump, they're not going to put him in jail. So a number of people who were saying they're going to put him in jail and he's not going to be in the White House, that was never going to be the case. So now you got to understand how money and power work in this country.
Merchan is off the bench.
Yeah.
It happened that quickly.
In a lot of ways, not that different from any other sentencing. It took 38 minutes. That's about average for a sentencing in state court. But the focus has largely been on Trump's out-of-court conduct.
Yeah, Caitlin, what do you think? You've been watching all this.
Well, the most interesting statement from Judge Merchan just a few moments ago before he left the bench was acknowledging Trump's election win. He was saying, ordinary citizens don't get these kind of legal protections. It's the office of the presidency that is bestowing these to the office holder. And he said, it is the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, essentially acknowledging that, yes, because Donald Trump is going to be inaugurated in a few days, that is changing the sentencing here. I mean, if this had happened in July before he had actually won, you could see, that was way before he was afforded those protections and how different that was.
And Caitlin, you were reporting that Donald Trump did not have to appear in court this morning. He did this over video.
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed from attending this trial when it was going on is that the way that the Trump team has framed Justice Merchan and how he acts here is so different than what I personally witnessed and reported on from court, which is that the judge actually goes out of his way and bends over backwards a lot of the time to accommodate Donald Trump. He was never bothered when Trump was sitting there, hitting his attorneys, passing them notes, talking sometimes out loud during the hearing. And instead, he allowed him to appear virtually from Mar-a-Lago with his attorney there, Todd Blanche.
We're going to pause here. I want you to see the TV screen over here. That's Donald Trump and his attorney. So here's another thing about money and privilege, folks. Just another thing about this. You didn't even have to be there. He didn't even have to appear in court. They did it virtually. I can understand if we were still under the pandemic, but come on. He didn't even have to be there, you guys. So imagine someone who doesn't have the money, who doesn't have the resources. Imagine them saying, can I just do this virtually? He didn't even have to be there. We'll go on a little bit more and I'll break down some more details about this.
Other attorney, I believe, was in
court. Is that
court.
a photo? We're looking at it right now.
Yeah, and so see the two of them appearing side by side. He was not there actually in the courtroom, which, as Ellie would note, I would assume is pretty unusual for
almost
you to not
unheard
be present.
of. Almost unheard of.
Ellie, what do you make of these images that we're looking at right here?
Well, they got fully dressed up.
This is historic.
Right, and look, this is a criminal defendant at his sentencing sitting in front of the American flag. I mean, I promise you that's never happened before in American history. But as Caitlin said, the judge made clear that you are only getting this sentence. The DA said the same thing because of your status as president. And look, in our legal and constitutional system, the president just is different. One thing we will never know, I wish we could somehow figure this out, what would the sentence have been if Trump had not won the election, right? I mean, there certainly would have been some sort of probation. Judge Merchan, would he have sentenced to prison? It's one of those hypotheticals. We'll never know.
Because Laura,
I still don't think, even if he didn't win, I don't think they would have sentenced him to prison. I'm just being honest about that. I don't think he would have been sentenced to prison, even if he did not win, because of who he is. Like I said, like when you have that type of money and privilege, like, come on, get out of here, man. Someone put a comment in the chat and they said, Troll said, his lawyer is Nixon. That guy does kind of look like Richard Nixon. Let's get into a little bit of the details about this and what this means going forward. Again, like I said, I saw people get all excited about this online and I'm like, guys, it's unconditional. That means he's not going to receive any type of penalty. Let's bring this in here. Takeaways from the sentencing hearing of Donald Trump. All right, again, he does kind of look like Nixon a little bit. Okay, so here's a couple of key takeaways. It says that Donald Trump was sentenced without penalty in New York hush money case Friday after a symbolic and historic and unprecedented hearing following his first felony conviction of a former and soon to be sitting president. So it says here that Judge Yvonne J spoke to Trump for several minutes, telling the president-elect it was the office of the presidency and not the occupant that was afforded extraordinary legal protections, requiring him to impose a sentence of unconditional discharge without any punishment. So if he didn't win the election, I would imagine maybe they would have given him probation. He probably would have been hit with a lot of fines. Like, I don't know, but I don't think they would have sentenced him to jail. This is not the first time that Donald Trump has had to deal with legal issues. Like at one point he was working with this guy like back in the 70s. Geez, I have to remember his name. Eric might remember. He was working with this guy back in the 70s. This guy was like a lawyer, but this lawyer was known to like represent different mob bosses. So this isn't the first time that he's had to deal with legal issues. It goes on to say here, Trump was convicted in May on 34 counts of falsifying business records, while he has vowed to keep fighting the conviction through the appeals court. Friday's sentencing cements that Trump will be the first convicted felon to become president 10 days from now. And what did I tell you guys about that felon wording, right? Like that can be a turnoff to certain demographics, certain communities, Democrats that are bragging and saying things like, oh my God, can you believe this felon, this felon, this felon? And whether you agree with what Donald Trump did or not, using that word can be a turnoff to certain demographics. There are certainly, some people in the Black community that don't find that too favorably for you to look down on someone because they have a record, especially those that have been in prison because of Joe Biden's crime bills and had harsher prisons, right? So let's go on here. It says unprecedented sentencing. It says that Merchant already signaled he would not sentence Trump to any punishment, let alone jail time. That's something the U.S. Supreme Court noted when it allowed the hearing to go forward in a 5-4 ruling Thursday night over Trump's objections. But that didn't make Friday's sentencing any less significant or embarrassing for Trump, who was allowed to appear virtually from his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. So, yeah, I mean, listen, I know people that have had to deal with legal issues, whether it was like a DUI or something like that. But this whole idea of, can I just do this virtually and not appear in court during the pandemic? Probably. But outside of that, if they weren't there physically present in the courtroom, there would have been a warrant out for their arrest. And I'm not talking about for like murder or burglary or anything like that. I'm talking about people that I know that have had like DUI or they had like reckless driving charge, that type of thing. They had to appear in person. So again, this is what happens when you have money and resources like that. So it is official that Donald Trump has been sentenced. He will have the title, of a felon. He will be a convicted felon going into the White House. And I'm saying that because I'm pretty sure if we're looking at partisan politics, the Democratic Party is going to try to use that as much as they can throughout Trump's presidency. And it would be the same thing vice versa. If it was Joe Biden in this position, it wouldn't be Kamala Harris because she is the cop. But if it was Joe Biden in this position, it would be the same thing. The other party would use that to their advantage and say, we have a felon in the White House. So that's the breaking news, folks. Buckle up. 2025 is going to get bumpy. Hey, guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.